All right, so we are going to go over different types of buffers. A lot of times when we hire a new detailer, and if you're watching this video, you probably were very recently hired with us, we'll ask a couple times during the screening, do you have experience with a DA and a rotary buffer? And if you've made it this far, you probably said yes, or you're willing to learn, or you're comfortable learning, or you've worked with one or the other, but maybe not both. If you have worked with both and you have a lot of experience, you might learn something in this video, you might not. But most people that come on don't have a super deep experience with all those things. So we're going to go over them. Kind of the different uses of the buffers, why the buffers are called different things, how they work differently, and what should be used for what. We're also going to go over some pads, because a lot of times there's confusion about what pad you should be using. All of these pads are super used. This is not what they'll look like when they're new, but I pulled them out of the bin really quick so we can make this video to explain it to you. Okay, so we have 4 different buffers that we're showing you right now. This is a DA buffer. We're going to go deep into that. This is a rotary buffer, or a high-speed buffer. This is also a rotary buffer, just a much cheaper one. And then this will be called an orbital buffer if you buy it some places. Some places will call this a dual action buffer. We will never refer to it as that. It's called an orbital buffer. And this is really just meant for waxing, but we're going to go into that also. So we can start, let's start with the wax buffer. So this is a 10-inch orbital buffer. It's pretty inexpensive. You can get it for like 25, 30 bucks depending on where you go. If you go to like Advanced Auto Parts or like an AutoZone or something, sometimes you can get them for like 15 bucks. Sometimes they're even cheaper at Walmart. This is good for spreading wax. That's it. That's all you can do with this. This does not, you cannot compound a car with it. You cannot buff a boat out with it. It doesn't matter if you put compound on it. It's not strong enough to do it. They make weaker, smaller one-hand versions of this. Same story. You can't buff a car out with it. You can't prep for ceramic with it. You can't spread ceramic with this. This is like if you're doing a big RV job or a boat job and you want to be able to spread wax over an already reflective surface. This is good. This will work for that. But that is all it will work for. And I'll show you why. I'll plug it in real quick. So when you turn this buffer on and you press it against something, it's going to slow it down a lot. So like when I turn it on, cool, it spins. It has a random action to it, so it's not spinning in a circle, so it'll help you reduce swirls. I would never use this to spread wax on a car, ever. Don't spread wax on a car with this. It's good for boats, it's good for RVs because the gel coat is thicker, it's stronger. You're not going to scratch a boat or an RV. You could scratch a car with this if there's something on the pad. But again, just for wax, boats and RVs. For our weekender packages and our mariners packages, you can use this. Captain's package, road warrior package, this isn't what you'd want to use. You'd want to be using a stronger buffer. But literally you would just apply wax to it, put it on the surface, and then start going over the surface. And then it's going to leave behind a hazy wax, and you take a microfiber and wipe the excess wax off. The issue is with a buffer like this, the reason you can't buff with it, like actually remove oxidation with it, is once you turn it on and you push it against the surface because you're trying to cut, or even if you just have it resting there, the motor in this is so weak, because it's like 20 bucks, that it's slowing this down. So this is just vibrating at this point. It's not actually spinning. So even if you put compound in or compound on the boat or however you've applied the compound, it's not spinning. So it's actually not removing any gel coat. It's hard to see because to me it looks like it's spinning, but if I put my hand on it, it's not spinning past my hand much. I can see it's spinning, yeah, sure, but it's spinning super slow. It's really just vibrating more than anything. So again, can't cut with it, can't buff with it. You can apply wax with it. It saves you some time because it's a big pad. It's a 10-inch pad, so you can like really apply a lot of wax with it really quick. But not for cutting, not for buffing, not for polishing. A lot of you know that. Some people try to do that, and it sucks because they spend the whole day working on the boat and they think they're trying to learn, and they're doing a captain's package or a road warrior package for the first time, and they just work 10 hours and it's like, oh, it's not working, the oxidation's not coming off. You're just using the wrong buffer or the wrong pad or the wrong compound. So it's vital to make sure you have the right tools and the right material and you're doing the process right. If you're unsure about that, call into the office and ask, and we'll explain it to you. If you watch the other videos, we do explain it kind of at length. But if you're ever unsure, call and ask. Watch some YouTube videos so you can learn about it. You can learn different paint correction techniques, both and RVs. There's a lot of people with a lot of conflicting opinions on it. Everybody thinks they're doing it the best way possible. That's great. There's a lot to learn from a lot of people. Depending on what buffer you're using, what compound system you're using, there's going to be different opinions. But you just want to be making it look right for the client. So whatever works for you is great, but that orbital buffer is never going to do the job. So you don't want to be trying to do it with that. On that orbital buffer, it just comes with a, I'll show you. It just has a foam back to it. That's the foam back, and it has these little bonnets that come over it. This one doesn't want to come off. Whoops. It has a little bonnet on top of it. So it's just this little piece of fabric that goes over it. This one's pretty used, which is why it's just sitting in the garage, not being used right now. They need to replace the bonnet for it. But that's it. And you can just buy these. You can wash them. After a little while, they kind of get beat up, so you want to buy new ones. A detail shop carries them. It's kind of hard to find these. But when you buy it at like a Home Depot or a Lowe's or an Ace Hardware or wherever, it usually comes with one bonnet to cover it. But again, not for buffing. If you get out there and you try to buff a car or an RV or a boat with it, you're going to spend your whole day and you're not going to get what you want out of it. So don't try. Next up, we can do the DA buffer. So this is what most people are going to use to polish out a car. There are some people who think you should only buff out a car with a rotary buffer. There's some truth to that. There's some things that you can't get out of the paint with a DA that you can only get out with a rotary because you just need more aggression. Not more aggression, but more cutting power. They make some rotary DA hybrids where it'll do the dual action on a rotary buffer, so it has a bigger motor working behind it, and you kind of have a lot more power to it. You can do that cutting. Something like this. This is a torque, which means it's chemical, guys. It's okay. It's not the best buffer in the world. It's not super expensive. You'll see by the size of it, it's not the most powerful buffer in the world. They make a bigger torque that has a little bit more meat behind it. But this will pretty much do what you need it to do for basic polishing jobs on cars. This is something you really only want to use on a car. On a boat or an RV, you could spread wax with it if you want to. But you don't want to try to cut with this on a boat or an RV. It just doesn't have enough power behind it. So this is really good for cars. If you're polishing a car that doesn't have a lot of paint defects, this is your way to go. When you're polishing those cars, it's important you have the right pad. Here's a foam pad you could use. This is not a bad foam pad. This still has compound dust on it, but literally you just stick it to it, and then you put the compound on it. I didn't stick it very evenly. You want to try to get it as even as possible in the middle for you. And you want a pad ideally that fits this perfectly. This is a 6-inch pad. This is a 5-inch backing plate. So this buffer can take a 5 or a 6-inch backing plate. This has a 5-inch plate on it, so you'd ideally want a 5-inch pad, but you'll be okay with a 6-inch pad. It's not a big deal, especially because it's just a foam pad. You'd put your compound on this and then push it into the car, and we show you that at length on different videos, which is why I'm not really going into it right now. You're not going to see me compound a car or a boat in this video. That's in other videos. I'm more just talking about the buffers. The reason this is called a dual action buffer is because this backing plate on the top doesn't spin in a perfect circle. It spins in a circle, yes, but there's a counterweight in here that makes this circle not repeat in the same direction. So if you think about it, this would be it spinning in a circle, but that circle is also moving in a circle. So it's doing this in a way. Some of these are triangular, so it'll kind of do this and it'll move in sharper lines, but this one spins in a circle, but that circle also spins in a circle. Way to think about it is the moon goes around the earth, but the earth goes around the sun. So it's spinning, but it's also spinning. It sounds silly when I explain it that way, but it does help you understand that the reason it does that is so if you're holding it on a car for a long time, it's not in one spot for any amount of time, it's not going to damage the car nearly as quickly because it has that secondary action to it. It's going to stop you from damaging the paint. If you have a rotary buffer, it's much less forgiving. You could damage the paint very quickly. So that's a dual action buffer. It's good for polishing cars when the paint correction isn't super bad. It's not good for removing oxidation on boats. It's not good for removing oxidation on RVs. You can spread wax with it. A lot of people do that. If you don't want to use the orbital buffer, a lot of people don't even own that. They'll just spread wax with this. That's a good way to do it. If you have a microfiber pad, so not a foam pad, neither of these foam pads, not a foam pad, not a wool pad, but a microfiber pad, which is a soft foam backing with the cloth on top. You can spread ceramic with that, and you can do more aggressive paint correction with that. That's a good pad to have. Meguiar's makes some, Mizerna makes some, I know 3M makes some. 3M owns Meguiar, so of course they make them also. You can buy them from any of those companies. Those are super good for doing paint corrections. But at the same time, you could also be very successful using foam pads. I know Rupes uses, they use foam pads for all their paint corrections. So, I mean, you could do it either way. It just depends on what system you're using. I like the microfiber pads. If I'm doing a big ceramic boat job, I'll use that microfiber pad to spread my ceramic so I'm not stuck using the little. I do use the little block if I'm spreading ceramic on a car, though. I don't use a buffer for that. It's smaller. I want to get into tighter spots. But on a boat where there's a lot of volume to do, or an RV, I'm using a DA at the lowest speed possible with a microfiber pad attached to it that I've saturated with ceramic. The speed setting is usually here on them. When you're polishing a car, you want to be at like a 3 or a 4, maybe a 5, never a 6, not all the way down to a 1. A 1's not doing anything. A 1 is good for spreading material. A 2 maybe for spreading material, up to a 3, a 4, a 5 for polishing, never really up at a 6. You're just kind of slinging compound at that point. The reason the torque's not a great buffer is the on-off is right here, which is kind of silly. You want one where the button's a lot easier to reach. I know Porter Cable puts it right here, which if you're holding it with 2 hands, that's useful because you can slide with your thumb while you're adjusting the speed. This one's kind of out of the way and it's kind of awkward, so it's not the best design in the world. But that's it. That's pretty much, every DA buffer is pretty much exactly that way. So again, good for cars, good for polishing. Spread ceramic on a boat, spread ceramic on an RV. Do not spread ceramic on a car with this. You cannot polish a boat or an RV with this. It's just not strong enough. DA buffer. So, that said, you'll notice that had a Velcro back to it. So before we really start talking about the rotary buffer, here is a very inexpensive rotary buffer. This is the rotary buffer that most people will start with. There's nothing wrong with it. It has a speed setting, just like any other rotary buffer. It has a 7-inch head, just like pretty much every rotary buffer would. The reason it's called a rotary buffer is it moves in a circle. It's just a circle. It doesn't have that dual action mode to it. It just moves in a circle. It has a spindle with no counterweight. You'll notice the motor of this is a lot bigger than the motor on the DA. It is a stronger buffer. It will run at a higher RPM. Now, all of these will run at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 RPM. Some of them say that. Most of them really only go up to like 3,500. DeWalt's speed has the RPMs on it, not numbers. Most of them break it down to like a 1 through 6. So it'll be a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. And you just kind of have to get used to what those are. DeWalt actually has the RPMs broken down on it, which is kind of cool. But those also correlate to a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. While we're talking about that, Makita, right here on it, actually has, it tells you what their RPMs and the numbers are. You'll see a 1 is 600 RPMs, a 6 is 3,200 RPMs, and it kind of gives you a graph for that. DeWalt doesn't give you that graph, it just gives you the RPMs. Most of them don't give you that graph, they just give you numbers. This is a cheap one. So you can get this for like 40, 50, 60, 70 bucks at pretty much any hardware store. So you can go to an Ace Hardware, you can go to a Northern Tools, Harbor Freight. Lowe's and Home Depot don't typically carry these. You need to go to like an automotive shop for that. So either a hardware store or like an AutoZone. Advanced Auto Parts will carry them sometimes. But you know, Harbor Freight, Northern Tools, Ace Hardware, places like that will carry these. If you have a job coming up where you need a rotary buffer, which is going to be a Captain's package or a Road Warrior package, and you have to have that rotary buffer, you want to get on Amazon and order one as quick as you can. If you don't have a lot of money when you're starting out, this is a good buffer. It's 40, 50, 60, 70 bucks. Most people can afford that. If you're going to a Road Warrior or a Captain's package, you're making $200, $300, $400, $500, $600. If you're doing a ceramic coat on a boat and you need that buffer, you might be making $800 in that day. It pays for itself. It's a tool that's going to make you a lot of money. People try to go out there with that orbital buffer and they waste a whole day, they waste a lot of money, the client ends up not being happy. You have to be out there with the right tools. This is one of those prerequisite tools for working here, really. But that doesn't mean you have to go shell out $150, $200 on one. You can get by with this. One issue with this is it comes with this backing plate. This backing plate is smooth. There's no Velcro on it. They're going to sell you a pad. It's a bonnet like this. So on the back of it, it has elastic, and you're supposed to stretch the elastic over this, and that's how you put it on there. I can put it on there for you, but you get the point. It stretches over the head of it, and that's how it sits on here. You don't want that. This is not the best pad in the world. They don't sell wool pads that can cut, like on a Road Warrior in a captain's package. They don't sell the right wool pad for this. You might have a wool bonnet. That's not what you want. These are the wool pads you want. These are pretty used ones, so they're kind of flat. They'll be fluffier than this, but they have a Velcro back to them. The issue with buying this buffer is it doesn't come with that Velcro back, so you can't attach it. If you can't attach it, you can't use it, and these don't do the job. So if you go and get this buffer, you have a second purchase that you need to make, and that is a Velcro backing plate. Now, all you need is the size of your rotary buffer. It's almost always a 7 or an 8-inch rotary. So you just need a 7 or an 8-inch backing plate on Amazon. They're like 10 bucks. You can find one for like 15 bucks, 10 bucks, 20 bucks. They're not expensive. But you have a tool that will make you $500, $600 a week, and it's going to cost you like 100 bucks up front. Must get one. Obviously, you just pull the trigger to make it run. There's a locking button, so I can pull the trigger and then push the button and then let go of both. As long as this is suppressed when I let go of it, and it'll run without me having to hold it, and then I can press the trigger to release that. They all function in that way. They all function exactly that way. To release the spindle, you just push this button down, you turn this until it locks, and then you can pull this off as well. But that's a rotary buffer, a pretty cheap one. A more expensive rotary buffer is a Makita. Most people are going to run a DeWalt, for the record, but Makita and DeWalt are the two big companies that you really see for rotary buffers. Now, you have people who have Rupez's and more expensive rotary buffers. Those are great. They're phenomenal. If you're ready to drop $400 or $500 on a buffer, do it. But most people starting out, they just look at these as a utility. If you do boats, you don't want this. You don't want a $400 or $500 boat or a buffer hanging around saltwater all the time. If that's something you're worried about, get one like this. It's a good workhorse buffer. You'll see this is a Velcro pad on the back. The trigger's the same. The locking button is the same. Here's the speed. We talked about the graph already. This is the release button for the rotary up top. They're the same buffer. This one's meatier. It's stronger. So when I push it against the surface and I'm laying into something to buff it, like a boat or an RV, you can really lay into boats, for the record. But you always want to keep it flat. You don't want to cut angles. Same thing with an RV, because the paint's even thinner on an RV. Flat, not at an angle. You'll cut right through the paint. You don't want to be using this on a car if you don't know what you're doing. This is not a tool to play with on a car. You can damage the paint pretty quickly, and now you're paying a body shop to fix this paint when we were there just to clean the car. So you got to be careful with this. This is the tool you must have to do boats and RVs. It is not a tool to play around with on a car, though. Because it has that Velcro pad on the back. You can put foam pads on this. They're going to fit just fine. You can put wool pads on this. They're going to fit fine. You might be thinking, why is that one blue and why is this one white? This is more of a polishing pad. This is a cutting pad, but you'll see it's a wool pad with a Velcro back. They're both 7-inch pads, so they fit this buffer just fine. You might see one of these. This is a wool pad. It has a Velcro back, but it's flexible like this. You want the hard back. You want this one where I can't really fold it. This is the right pad. This is the only pad you want to be using, boat and RV. They sell these though, these little flimsy pads. It's not the pad you want. It's not going to do the job you want it to. This isn't right. You might see one. It might be sold at that auto store or whatever, but it's not the pad you want. If you have to order those wool pads on Amazon, that's what you got to do. They're not easy to find locally. Wool pads aren't. So buy a 3-pack, buy a 4-pack. Make sure you have a spur tool so you can clean that. Watch our training video about cleaning the tools with the spur pad. I got some other pads we already showed you. This is the bonnet, not what you want. This is a foam pad that you're probably going to get with a DA buffer. It screws on. You'll see that sometimes Porter Cable sells theirs this way. You could use this on the car for a little while, but you want to buy a Velcro backing plate, and you want to be putting foam pads on that plate. You don't want to be buying more of these. They're hard to find. But you can use it while it's on there for a little while and then dispose of it while you're waiting for your backing plate to come in. It just screws in, so it's a pain in the ass because you have to completely unscrew the pad when it tears. This is obviously, this is a pad for a drill. It goes on a drill attachment. It's done for headlight restorations. The only point of showing you this pad is just make sure your pad fits. This is obviously very silly, but this is just as silly as having a 5-inch pad on here. So this, I promise you, is just as silly as this. They're equally silly. If this is exposed and it starts hitting anything, you're going to damage whatever it's hitting very, very quickly. So make sure your pad is the right size. If anything, it's a little bit bigger. On a 7-inch pad, or a 7-inch backing pad, an 8-inch pad is fine. You saw that with a DA. That's a 5-inch backing plate. We had a 6-inch pad on it. That's fine. Just never a pad that's smaller. Has to have a stiff back to it if it's a wool pad. Has to be Velcro, can't be a bonnet. This is what you want to use for boats and RVs. So you need a DA, you need a rotary, you don't have to have an orbital buffer, you need foam pads, you need wool pads. Don't get bonnets, make sure they're Velcro backed, make sure you have your Velcro backing plate, and then learn what speeds you should be using for spreading, what speeds you should be using for actual buffing and polishing. Don't ever put compound directly on a wool pad. You want to be putting the compound on the vessel or the RV and then cutting with it. With foam pads, you want to be putting the compound on the foam pad and then spreading it while it's on the foam pad. We go over that at length in other videos also, but that's really all there is about buffers. I just wanted to go through all of that with you guys because a lot of details that have been coming on recently, they have that orbital buffer and they try and go out and do a job that they're not ready for, or maybe not that they're not ready for, but they're just not equipped for. So go spend 80, 90 bucks on a DA, go spend 60, 70, 80 on a rotary, and you'll make your money back in a day, 2 days. Those jobs that you missed, buffer, you don't have a DA buffer, cost you a lot more than it would to just go get those polishers. But that's about it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.